All right. So, what do you think when you hear the word retailtainment? So, on the surface, it is a portmanteau of two words, retail and entertainment. So, that seems pretty simple, right? You're shopping and you're having fun at the same time. So, it's not purely a transactional experience. I guess you're being amused and entertained by your surroundings. That term makes me think of modern shopping places like American Dream in New Jersey, which is a mega mall with a theme park and a water park and a Ferris wheel. They even have an indoor ski slope. So it can't get more entertaining than that. But I mean, on a smaller scale, I think about walking down a city street that has stores and restaurants and the hustle and bustle of people watching, where you're both shopping and being entertained by your surroundings at the same time. But I know there is a lot more to it than just that. My guest today is a retailtainment expert. He's created marketing campaigns for brands like Coca-Cola. He's created multimedia events for brands like Burt's Bees. He was the CMO at Aiden and Anise and Halo. He's now developed an MBA learning experience for the University of Minnesota's Carlson School of Management. It's called Retailtainment, the Art of Experiential Commerce. And it includes 2 weeks of immersion in the retail landscape in Japan. So we're going to get into it. We're going to dig into retailtainment with my guest, Andrew Lainsbury. You're listening to Where We Buy. It's the show where we talk with retail experts and we visit the places where we buy. My name is James Cook. I research retail and real estate for JLL. Today, we're welcoming Andrew Lainsbury. Welcome, Andrew. It's great to have you on the show.
Hey, thanks so much, James. I'm really excited about this.
Yeah, this is awesome. So I get your bona fides correctly here. You're senior lecturer, marketing department at Carlson School of Management at the University of Minnesota. Then you also
Yes,
have your own, I guess, marketing consulting firm too, called Culture Flash.
that's true.
Okay,
Yeah.
excellent. So I want to hear more about retailtainment. You're in an entertaining spot today. I see all of these international flags behind you. So perfect. We're to think about retailtainment globally. You're just in your office, right?
I am. I'm right here at the University of Minnesota, and that's my lovely backdrop.
Okay, I love it. Well, I want to get into this class, this immersion experience that you're doing around retailtainment. But I mean, let's start high level. I mean, how did I do? I took a stab at talking about retailtainment. How would you define it?
It's such an interesting question. And one of the things that I first discovered when I began to dig into this area is that I don't know if there's any standard industry accepted definition of this space. And I think that part of it is probably because it's thought to be self-explanatory. Just like you said, it's retail, it's entertainment. But um, what what is below the surface of that? And I think that what I discovered is that there are lots of different ways to cast this whole area of study and experience. There are many scholars, there are many other marketers who have framed it up as immersive entertainment or immersive retail, experiential retail. There's a lot of interesting work that's been done in this space. And as I began to really wrap my hands around it, I became interested with just all the different components that go into creating an immersive retail experience. It's become really an area of passion for me, and I've really enjoyed every bit of it so far.
And the components, I mean, is it sort of like a theatrical experience? Are you thinking about it in terms of, I don't know, what music and, setting and things like that?
Yeah, I think of it in very multi-sensory terms. I think that the visual parts are probably easiest for us to wrap our hands around because we can look at them as tangible elements of the experience. And so we can begin with the design of physical spaces. It's everything from how the stores are laid out to some of the less visible dimensions, whether it's music or other types of sounds. Some of the best purveyors of retailtainment actually incorporate other senses like texture, taste, scent. It's all part of enveloping you in this world that kind of it sways your attention away from the transactional side of simply buying stuff. And so it's really very complex, it's very interdependent, and it's super interesting when you start to deconstruct all the different pieces.
Does that mean because it takes you away from the transaction, does that mean if you've done a good job at retailtainment, you might be able to charge more because people aren't as price conscious?
I think that that's a really interesting question to think about. There are a lot of folks out there, there are a lot of interesting discussions that will actually start from that point about, is your experience fulfilling enough? Is it stimulating enough? Is it immersive enough so that people would be willing to actually pay money to experience everything that you've created through dramatic lighting and soundscapes and all of the different pieces? And so I think that that's an interesting bar that marketers and retailers can hold themselves to, is to ask that question: Is this experience cool enough? Is it wild enough so that people would actually pay an admission fee?
Yeah, it's funny you say that. Kevin Kelly, who wrote this book Irreplaceable, and he wrote, "Are people willing to crawl through mud in order to visit your place?" Which is, I guess, even more intense than paying to go, because you get all muddy in the process, right?
Yeah, that is intense.
I know, right? Well, can any retailer do retailtainment, or is it just high end or medium priced retailers?
I think that there are all sorts of really interesting examples, and they're not all in Japan. There are many examples here in the United States and other places I've encountered in my travels. I think that some of the most impactful ones that I've come across are the places where you would least expect to find entertainment woven into the experience. When you think about a brand like Lush that has done something really phenomenal on a multi-sensory basis with products that, before they started to dimensionalize the brand meaning in some very unexpected ways through just really, really powerful scents and interactive experiences where you can see the products at work in really creative ways that engage customers and promote conversation between staff members, customers, and even stimulating conversations between customers who may not know each other, just centered around those brand experiences. You can really start to challenge yourself as a marketer, as a retailer, to find out what are the types of ways that we could bring maybe lower engagement products to life through entertainment.
Yeah, and Lush, I was thinking of the smells too,
Yeah.
as a part of
Yes.
that's such a big part of the Lush experience.
Yeah.
It's interesting, when I hear retailtainment, you heard in my intro, my mind goes to the big, right? So I'm
Yes.
thinking about, what am I thinking about? Have you been to a Starbucks roastery before,
Yes.
which is like the Willy Wonka of coffee shops? There's like tubes everywhere. There's all these different. I can't even explain it. If you haven't been, just go. There's a number of them around the world, but that's really what I think of when I think of retailtainment. But you get retailtainment when you go to your local, barista as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's sort of funny because one of the reasons that I think I ended up in this space of trying to really, really wrap my hands around retailtainment was um, my understanding of Disney and Disney theme parks. The one of the probably pioneers of this space, and the simple framing of the guest relationship within a retail environment. You may not think of a theme park as a retail space, but it is. And it's divided up and organized into so many conceptual little pockets and places that you're transported into different times, different regions of the world. You're enveloped in the storyline. And one simple trick that Disney did so effectively was to redefine the relationship between retailer and shopper. And just by tweaking that one word and calling the shopper a guest, all of a sudden you're changing the dynamic. You're treating somebody with hospitality as opposed to just customer service. You're rolling out the red carpet. You're enveloping them in a storyline where they're effectively a star. They're not just looking at cool surroundings and scenery and buying themed items and souvenirs. They're actually the center of the storyline that all the characters are playing a supporting role for. And so there's so many layers to it. It's just really, it's wild, very, very powerful.
So yeah, I mean, I feel like, and I'm sure people have created whole programs around studying what Disney does and trying to apply that to retail because it really is, it's masterful. Is there, so the thing about, making the person the protagonist in this story, like the star of the story, how might one do that in just, a store at the mall? How do you make that transformation?
I think a lot of times it's a matter of trying to map out what is the desired storyline that you would like somebody to experience. And that's hard. That's really hard because you're trying to not just write an ad line, you're not just trying to create a TV spot or a print ad or anything else that might be considered traditional media. It's very experiential, it's very multisensory. And so I think that you need to start with the clarity of what is the experience that you're trying to create in the heart, in the mind, in the stomach of the person that may be walking through a three-dimensional space. And once you've got clarity on what that desired experience is like, then you can start playing with different multisensory variables to find out if there are ways that you can trigger responses, trigger feelings. Um, you can play with dimensions of space, knowing that compressed spaces might make you feel a little bit anxious. You can play with lighting, you can play with sense. There are different human reactions that can be prompted by any of these stimuli, and there's so many different levers that can be pulled. It's fascinating.
Another thing, when I think about Disney, the most genius thing that I think about is turning the queue, the waiting part, into part of the attraction, to the
Yeah.
point where this one time years ago, we had a special behind the scenes tour at, I guess it was California Adventure. And as part of it, we got to bypass the queues and go on the rides, just like two or three rides as a part of the tour. But I felt kind of like I was missing out because I was only getting that 3-minute ride, and we bypassed the whole queue, which is all part of the themed adventure that's building you up to the ride. And what an amazing trick to turn the wait into part of the fun.
I think you're hitting on something that's really, really interesting, James, because the anticipation, that's a moment to capitalize on. And not to go too deep on Disney, but Disney has done some really exciting and special things with vacation planning so that when families are booking a vacation, they receive wristbands in the mail with, all of the little elements that will have you start that countdown clock in your mind so that you can start to capitalize on the power of the anticipation. There are people who believe that the power of travel and the power of taking vacations is wonderful, and it is. I love to travel, but you're also you're paying for the anticipation, and it's important to amortize the cost of any vacation or travel experience to include all of the buildup so that you can start to plan and research and watch that fire get stoked even before you get on the airplane. And it's really powerful.
Yeah, that's so cool. Well, speaking of trips, you're heading out. When are you heading out to Japan?
We'll be headed out in early January, so
Okay.
right after the holidays. Yeah.
And so, what do you think? Why Japan? What can we learn about retailtainment from a visit to Japan?
Yeah. Japan really popped to mind at the very early stages of this concept because there are so many interesting things happening from a technology standpoint. We're talking about incredible digital capabilities, robotics. It's just really mind blowing to see the way that they've used multisensory stimuli and incorporated that into retail environments. And the angle that I'm really excited about taking is looking at that special intersection between commerce and culture because there are many things that you can do in retail environments around the world. But I think that that's an area that I'm especially interested in looking at is how can you not only create these three-dimensional multisensory immersive retail experiences, but also how can you leverage cultural cues to make the storyline even more impactful, more meaningful? One particular example that might resonate in Japan, especially, is when you're talking about a country with a very small land mass, when you talk about a country with a very high population density, the element of physical space becomes very luxurious. And so, how can you start to play with those elements of cultural insight and knowledge so that you can create spaces that have maybe a little bit more space between the tables in a restaurant, spaces that are just open and wide that you're not going to encounter in other areas of Tokyo specifically? How can you start to play with those different things, those different levers in ways that can unlock a new level of engagement with shoppers and customers overall?
Do you have certain places you're planning on taking the class to?
Yeah, I actually had the opportunity to go out to Tokyo and Osaka and Kyoto in May of this last year just to scout things out and view a number of retail locations. And I was pretty blown away with some of the things that I was able to see. There's a restaurant in particular in the Shibuya area of Tokyo that is staffed by robots. And it's wild. It's amazing to think that there are people who are interacting with robots to place their orders and deliver their food. And there's a robot that actually remains stationed at your table while you eat to keep the conversation and the interaction going, to deliver an experience so that yes, you're eating, you're getting food, but you're walking away from the experience with this memory, with this absolutely unusual interaction that you can only get in a few places, probably in Japan or around the world.
Oh wow. Yeah, that sounds so cool. So I've never been to Japan, but I probably more than most watch a lot of YouTube videos about unique retail experiences. So I
Yeah.
feel like I've seen tons of video because Japan seems to just have more than its fair share of
Yeah.
unique retail experience. I'm just trying to think like there was a many cat cafes, there's a pig cafe, so you're paying not only for your beverages but also to spend time with little piglets. you know
Yes.
what else did I see recently? There was here's a good one. So it's a seafood restaurant where you go in and you get a pole with a fishing pole, and you actually fish for your seafood in
Yes.
like the middle
Yeah.
of the restaurant, and then they cook what you catch.
Yeah. I did not have the opportunity to witness that or experience it, but I know what you're talking about, and it's a way of involving you in the process and kind of transcending the whole transaction that comes with just ordering a meal in a restaurant. For me, what's really interesting is to start peeling back a lot of the layers to understand the cultural insights. And when we talk about some of the animal cafes in particular, it's really interesting to sort of feel that okay, why do those exist in the first place? Are they purely just to attract tourists as a novelty? And there's probably an element to that. But there's also an element that's very real about people living in very, very small quarters, which prevents owning pets. And so this is a way to deliver a pet experience, even for the locals, whether it's a cat cafe, an owl cafe, otters, capybaras, this way, all of the above and more. And so, like, just some of the realities around the geography, the economy, demographic situation, like a lot of those are the undercover drivers that are opening up unique opportunities on the retail front.
So that means that retailtainment is really going to be dependent on the culture of the region or the country or the city. Have you seen other, do you have other examples of how like that might vary? Are there certain things that catch on in some places and not so much in others?
It's a really interesting question. When you were talking a little bit about the American Dream Mall in New Jersey with the indoor ski slopes, um, which is amazing. I know that they have that as well in Dubai,
Yeah.
and I think that that's an example of something that probably caught on because of the sheer shock value.
Yeah.
The idea of being able to go downhill skiing indoors in Dubai is probably one of those things that just it becomes a magnet for that reason in and of itself. But I think that it's really interesting as well to when we talk about some of the potential drivers of this when if we're to loop back to that robotics restaurant, Pepper Parlor, part of it is for the novelty and the experience, but another real important driver is the fact that Japan's population is projected to be going down. And so they're actually needing to explore automation solutions in order to make sure that restaurants of the future will be able to be staffed. They have a very large elderly population in Japan, and people are not having children at the same rate that they have in previous generations. And so, how are you going to staff all of the many convenience stores, the thousands of convenience stores across this island nation? How are you going to staff the department stores, the supermarkets? How are we going to stock the shelves? So, they're getting out in front of things, not just because it's interesting from a retail experience standpoint, but because they're going to need to solve a problem that is waiting for them in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point. And boy, what a demographic challenge. And, I was digging into this topic like globally the other day, and it will eventually affect the US as well, but it's hitting Japan already, but it's something that we're going to have to learn. The U.S. is going to have to learn how Japan handles it because we're running
Yeah.
into the same issues as well. Yeah.
It's interesting. There's a real interesting note here. I saw a statistic the other day that was talking about if current population trends in Japan continue, you can expect their current population, which is probably about 123 million people, to be reduced by 50% by the year 2100. And so, like, you start following those trend lines, and that's not subtle at all. That's that's a problem that needs to be addressed. And so they're looking at it in a number of different ways through a variety of different lenses. And the whole convenience store component of retailtainment is also a real important area of interest. And I'm not sure, James, if you've dug into the convenience store space in Japan specifically, but wow, what another gold mine of interest and opportunity and adventure.
Yeah, I've watched many videos, and I have to say they're nothing like what we have here at the Circle K where I live. It is amazing, the variety, the quality of the, especially like prepared foods and
Yeah.
drinks and things like that. Just amazing. And there has been a talk of 7-Eleven specifically bringing some of that over to the US, but there's a lot of challenges with that. We'll see.
There's so many layers of interest to the C-store, the convenience store, world. 7-Eleven in particular, many years ago, was approached by a Japanese businessman to bring it over to Japan, and they ultimately ended up making that happen, and quickly, it just exploded in such a powerful way. It's now become a real foundational element of Japanese social structure. And now, just recently, I wanna say it was within the last several weeks, Circle K, I think, actually made a bid to acquire 7-Eleven, which is now a Japanese-owned company. So it was turned down. It's not going to happen, but wow, like everybody's looking at how the Japanese model reinvented what was previously an American company, 7-Eleven, and they've brought it to new heights.
Yeah, that's so cool. I mean, a big part of, I think, some of the behind the scenes magic from what I've read of, convenience stores in Japan is you've got such dense population that it's a lot easier for you to constantly replenish supplies. So you have daily, 3 or 4 times a day, new baked goods showing up, new prepared foods from some central commissary. Where in the US, your commissary is going to be like hours away and they come once a day, and so
Yeah.
it's tough to bring quality food to the convenience store. And that's why we have beef jerky and hot dogs, which, I still eat. Sure. I'm an
Yeah.
American, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But we all
Me
want
too.
something a little finer from time to
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, it's really funny. I think that that's another aspect of convenience stores that have really grabbed my attention is they're not just selling merchandise like many of the convenience stores here, but they've established themselves as community centers that provide really important services. They have photocopy machines. They have ways where you can pay your utility bills. If you are looking to ship your luggage from one city to another, they've established themselves as drop-off zones for suitcases. And so if you need a battery charger, cell phone charger, you can rent one for the day. The number of services, like day-to-day survival services that are centralized out of C stores are just amazing. So
That's so fast. And another thing too. So in the US, the C store is really around gasoline usually. And I
yeah,
think in Asia they don't normally, I mean it's, it's just in the city street, so there's no gas pump. So okay, so this begs an interesting question. So if we do eventually move to electric cars, we won't be going to the C store to gas up, but when we're on the road, we'll be going to fill up our battery, which actually right now takes longer. So
yeah.
we're potentially going to be spending more time at the convenience store. What can we do to add some more retailtainment to these gas stations, do you think?
Oh, such an interesting question. I wish I had an interesting answer. But, yeah, I think that part of it is just continuing to stay tight, to consumer needs. What's interesting, what's novel, what's exciting. Looking for those dead moments where consumers sometimes may have to wait. There are places where you can go and have your electric car battery changed out rather than waiting for a charge. And so, like, are there opportunities to incorporate a little bit of messaging, a little bit of music, a little bit of fun while those moments are happening to build loyalty, brand love, all of that?
Yeah, yeah, that's great. That's great advice. So you're taking this class to Japan. Are they? Is it each one have an individual project? They're going to have to dig into a different topic. What's the homework going to be like?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. I'm still working through some of
Okay.
those areas. However, I know that we will be doing retail safaris, essentially, where we'll be going out to different areas of the city. Ginza, which is the Beverly Hills of Tokyo, looking at perhaps luxury stores in that area of town. We'll be sending people out to apparel stores and home stores like Muji. For those of you who have been to Japan, I think Muji is such an interesting example of a store that is starting to reinvent what shopping can look like just through bold design and not a heavy reliance upon outside brand names. They're creating good priced quality garments and other home goods that are just they're blowing away everything else in terms of popularity, and the power of the Muji brand is just taking on a life of its own. So, and another store that I'm excited to take the class to would be Uniqlo. I know that there are locations here in the US, but being able to see the flagship store in the Ginza area with all of the theatrics, with floors and floors of rotating mannequins that are visible from the ground. Seeing the swinging pendulum, each one with mannequins, it's just like the sounds, the lights, the motions, the music. It's just absolutely captivating.
A few years ago, my research team wrote this report just on what make flagships special, and that
Ah,
Uniqlo flagship, which again I've never been to, but I've seen a ton of videos. um, One of the things we talked about is personalization, and
yeah.
on the one of the floors, you can pick out an item and get something embroidered on it, or get a photo. Like you can get a photo from your phone, I guess, screen printed on a different item. So it's just cool getting that thing that you could get anywhere, but getting it specialized and personalized that you can only do in this one location.
It's super cool because it's a ready-made souvenir that will capture that memory of the experience that you had in a retail environment. And that kind of touches on another interesting area that I know is going to be a powerful dig site in the Retailtainment course, which is a Japanese word that is called omotenashi. It can be translated as hospitality, but it's about a Japanese level of hospitality that goes beyond just customer service. It's about uh, I think of it as consideration beyond measure, consideration beyond imagination, even where there's a level of proactive anticipation of customer needs, where there's a type of just being able to offer a level of service and connection that blows away any prior expectations. And so that's another interesting cultural way to explore how people actually experience these environments through the power of service and hospitality.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great example, and I wasn't aware of that. Um, it's interesting. There are, as you in your travels, one of the things we always notice is the small cultural differences that you might never pick up on in a movie, but suddenly you find yourself just like the little things. And I do think that, in America, there's a certain style of hospitality that's a bit over the top,
Yeah,
which we're totally used to. And it probably from an outsider seems a little fake sometimes. I don't
yeah,
know if that makes sense. I'm just
yeah,
thinking about like when I was in England and people are just being normal all the time. I was like, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Right? We're not all
yeah.
faking being happy all the time.
I will tell you, James, I worked on the opening crew at Euro Disneyland back in 1992. And this was such an interesting case study for me because think about French culture and think about Disney. And
Right.
if you
Clash.
have thousands of people coming together, trying to bring to life this new idea of a theme park, which was a concept that was very unfamiliar at the time. Yes, they had fairs and festivals and things of that nature. But the idea of a perma smile, the idea of American style customer service brought to life by French employees was not something that was necessarily very easy to accomplish. And so I think it's interesting to think about how do you balance that? How do you make sure that authenticity is not compromised, that individual employees still feel like they're able to be themselves while at the same time bringing your brand to life? Because if authenticity is taken away, you can really interrupt the experience if somebody does have that permagrin plastered to their face.
Yeah, it has to feel genuine, which is tough. You
Right.
know,
Yeah.
as an associate, a store associate, it's tough to be genuinely happy for 9 hours in a row, you know?
Yeah, like I've worked retail all the way through high school and part of college, and you get screamed at a lot. It just it
It's
happens,
tough.
and so yeah, it's a tough job.
Okay, well, I want to go back to Safari for a second because I feel so. I'm a retail researcher, and my poor wife, God bless her, when we travel anywhere, I'm like taking photos, I'm taking notes. I'm like, oh, I got to find out who, who's the architect, and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And but I don't have any official way. I just take notes. What do you tell your students to do when they're on Safari in a location?
I think part of it is to give them a tangible way to start wrapping their hands around the retail experience. And this can get really soupy really fast because what I experienced myself when I was checking out some of these locations, both in Japan as well as just in general, is it's very easy to sort of slip into, ooh, ah, isn't that cool mode? And just like that's a little bit of a trap is sometimes you will step into a retail environment that's so overpowering and so amazingly cool that your critical brain kind of turns off and you just sort of get swept up in the moment and you walk away and you're just like, okay, well, that was cool, but like, is there anything else to it?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I'm working through is how do I provide different ways to get a foothold in a retail environment so that you can evaluate it and assess it. And I think that one of the interesting ways to approach this, perhaps, is to think about the customer journey and what are different ways that retailers can structure the experience in a way that they can take it step by step, breaking it down into pieces. Are there things that retailers can do to attract the attention of passersby to stop them dead in their tracks and make them go, wow, I need to go inside that store. And then once that happens, are there things that retailers can do to warm the waters and get them excited about like exploring further and going deeper? Once you take that step, are there ways that retailers can organize the experience so that it becomes really easy for people to understand how they should proceed through the store? And so, can you break it down into meaningful pieces that align with the customer journey in a way that allows you to actually be very, I don't want to say critical, but it's critical thinking is a super important piece of this because we need to go beyond just appreciating the coolness of these immersive 3D spaces.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a great point, and it's not critical like you're being negative about it, it's like you're
Right.
taking critical eye. I run into that a lot too because the first time I'm in some new flagship or some store that I've read a lot about, but I've never been in person, I'm just like, "Oh," I'm like, this is cool, isn't that cool?" But you're right, I mean, to be, a researcher, to be a student, you really need to be thinking objectively about what is this environment causing them to do. I like that idea of kind of mapping out the journey, where they get pulled to or pushed to, what people are drawn to, and then kind of figuring out why, I guess, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then the part that I always love to layer on top of an experiential type of assignment like this is asking people to unlock their own creative imaginations and say, what could you do next? If you were working at this retailer, how could you make this experience even more powerful? How could you connect with guests more deeply? What sorts of experiences could you create that would prompt conversation between guests who are there just to maybe buy something? Can you unlock different levels of participation and brand love through structured physical spaces or other multisensory stimuli? And so I love that's my favorite part, honestly, is seeing the ideas that sometimes students will come up with, say, yeah, but what if they did this? Or what if they reorganized this section or moved that section next to this one? It becomes really cool. And I think that people get a lot of energy out of that too.
Yeah, that's so much fun when you get to engage the creativity. It's kind of like watching a movie and then saying, "Oh, if I didn't like the ending so much, how would I rewrite the ending?" Which is a game my wife and I play a lot when we're like, "Oh, I like the beginning of that movie, but I don't like how it ended. How would you have done it differently?" And
Totally.
how would you lay out this store? So yeah,
Yeah.
and it's so interesting too because there are I guess I would call them experiential components that people will often say, well, we want to do a flagship. So let's throw this in. And it's usually like coffee bar or restaurant, or, there's certain things. And a lot of times it's like big technology display with no discernible purpose, but looks cool the first time you see it. That's often the thing too. So it's it's interesting to say critically, hey, are they able to use that technology or use those elements, but make it a real journey where you feel like you're on an adventure? Because you talked about like the protagonist of your own adventure.
Yeah. And I think that the trap that's super easy for retailers to fall into is to always try to tell their own story.
Oh,
And isn't that
yes.
like it's so funny because you can do that in a very well-intentioned way, but it can come off feeling so self-serving and nobody wants to like go through all of the tedious details of we were founded in this year and here's, here are the historical photographs. I mean, there's a place for that, but it's usually in the company archives. Is there a way that you can restructure that or make it meaningful or but like for me it's such an important point to just make sure that the person is the star of the story and everybody else plays a supporting role, and that requires so much restraint because I can tell you my career in marketing, like it is just every impulse I have is to want to get the brand message out there and make the brand the star, and to be able to flip that is really hard and it requires a lot of just like careful, trained eye to make sure that you can keep yourself honest.
Oh my gosh, what a great point. Yeah, oftentimes you'll go, and again, it's often like the flagship store, and there'll be an area that just feels like the brand museum, and I guess the challenge is to take some of those historical themes, um, and not be so obvious about them and kind of imbue them in the actual shopping
Yeah.
experience. I guess that's what you would probably recommend.
Yeah, yeah, and there's honestly, like I say, there's a place for that because if there are brand fanatics who are looking for all of the corporate details, who are looking to dig into the origins of the Walt Disney story, there's a market for that. Like, but it's probably not going to it's probably not going to hit the mark if that's what's built into the retail experience of a flagship store because there you're basically trying to tell a different story. You're trying to invite people in to get them interested in digging deeper. And so you can't presume that everybody's going to want that information as their first introduction to the brand.
Yeah, yeah. Boy, it's so fascinating. I feel like we could keep going, but we're running out of time. Andrew, if folks want to learn more about retailtainment, do you have books or maybe articles that you recommend to students?
Hmm. I've been basically consuming so much
All of it.
everything that I can get my hands on. I am just like absolutely swimming in articles and books, but some of the best ones don't even necessarily focus on retail. To be perfectly honest, one of the big books that I just keep coming back to as such a powerful book is Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller. That is all about brand storytelling. It's such a powerful book, and it really speaks to some of the points that we've hit on about making sure that your guest is really the star as opposed to the side or the supporting character. This ties in with a lot of the philosophy of Disney. I would say anything you can read on Disney theme parks and Disney Imagineering is usually very insightful, super interesting. And so those would probably be two really good places to start, and it's completely applicable to the retail space.
I do have another question before we go, because the mentioning about Disney got me thinking about, there were some recent announcements about a lot of expansion at some of the theme parks, and it was all involved with IP, like different intellectual property, be it, I don't know, Marvel or, and there was, the big Star Wars land. Um,
Yeah.
Retailtainment, is it in danger of being sucked up by just like more and more IP? I feel like so many experiences I see these days are based in a Netflix show or a movie or an animation. Um,
Mhm.
is that a danger, or am I overblowing it?
No,
Yeah.
I think that it's a really interesting piece of the puzzle, and I think that in a business environment where there's probably a lot of pressure for continued success and the desire to minimize risk, there are a lot of proven properties that are just known to be they're going to be surefire hits if they're brought to life in a way that's true to the IP that you're talking about. And so I understand that there's probably always going to be a role for that. There's going to be a temptation to keep leaning into the guaranteed triples or home runs versus the assorted singles and doubles that might be a little bit more risky. But I think that that's the challenge, is to balance the fresh new ideas, the bold, innovative thinking that's going to lead the way, as opposed to trying to deliver the surefire hits. And that's the challenge of anything in the entertainment space, is
Yeah.
how do you lead, as opposed to just trying to keep reading what you think consumers might want. And so, yeah, it's hard. It's really hard, but it's also really fun, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. It's a challenge, but I'm a researcher, so I just get to see what other people create and analyze that. You've actually, you're an actual marketer, so you got to go out and do this stuff. So, Andrew, if folks want to connect with you, is there a website they can go to check you out?
Yeah, I would say LinkedIn. I have a profile on LinkedIn, but my website is cultureflashmarketing.com. And there's a little bit of information on me and my approach to marketing, how I try to infuse cultural insights into the campaigns that I help to create to drive commerce with my clients. And so that's probably the best place to go.
Fantastic. And I'm gonna tag along for your trip to Japan in January with your class and be like, "Hi, I'm James. I'm a freshman. Good to meet
I
you
might
all."
need some help.
Thank you so much for joining me today. This has been one of the fun conversations of the year so far. This has been great.
Oh, well, I so appreciate the opportunity to connect with you, James, and I hope we get to talk again.
Absolutely. For all of my listeners out there, if you like this podcast, do me a favor. Go into the app that you're listening to and give us a rating, or even better, give us a review. You can write a sentence about what you liked about the show. You can subscribe to the audio of Where We Buy on the iPhone podcast app. We're also on Spotify, or you can find us on the web at wherewebuy.show. Now, if you've got a specific question about retail, shopping centers, or retail real estate, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and send me a message. Just search for James Cook, JLL. And our theme music is Run in the Night by the Good Lords under Creative Commons license. All right, that's a wrap.